The get to the bliss and the knowledge will follow. Get to the bliss, and the knowledge will follow. See? Because bliss is the power of Shakti, which is the subtlest. When bliss is present, it's a piece of cake to go beyond the dichotomized nature of thought. And at some point it feels like a catch-22, because up until there is dichotomized mental processes at work, bliss is concealed by that very, very dichotomy of subject and object, which gives a plenty of momentum for the pendulum to swing. And mind revels in that swing, see? That's what gives mind constantly something to think about, analyze, scrutinize, analyze, scrutinize. So analyze and scrutinize as a methodology then. So we've got this in descending order. And we're going to now give an overview of means. We spoke about this now at the beginning when I read the passages from the book with regard to the triple nature of penetration, or triple nature of Samavesha: penetration, immersion. Penetration here is to be understood as to being able to enter from one particular, let's say, phase, state, into another. And all of them can be seen as a process which takes place in succession, or, as you may recall, it can happen in non-linear manner, or all at once. So let us look into this now and give the analogy to the means with which the whole gamut and the whole scope of spiritual work comprised of, and applied to what here all this boils down to. So that what is represented by Anuttara is represented here, obviously, in conjunction with that what the primal quality of awareness is, as it begins to expand towards manifestation, and it is carried by the power of bliss. So we will speak about Anuttara and Ananda now here, by underscoring this with the highest means known as Anupaya. Okay? So we will then speak of volition or will in relation to the highest of the three applicable ones, as that which is known as the means we spoke earlier about, with the emphasis on aham, or I consciousness, which is basically known as Shambhavopaya. It's quite a long term, we will write them down, but so the highest of the applicable means, because the no means, just as a quick reminder, there are four, the four Upayas, classically spoken, and each of them corresponds to these aspects that we have outlined here. The highest of them, known as the no means mean. No means mean. Okay? So it's basically beyond any conceivable means. So therefore, in practical terms, it's often left out because nothing can be said about it. It's not something which one can apply because by its very definition, it's known as no means mean, but it is still upaya. So in other words, if we are to give it some attempts at defining it in language, then the operating power of that is bliss. Bliss, Ananda Shakti. The mode of cognition is beyond mental, verbal, or any other explanation, so one cannot say anything about it. Furthermore, it does not even belong to any of the categories which can be observed in the three respective upayas which are used, as it were, in spiritual discourses, in spiritual work on a daily basis. So that's why the highest one, no means mean, is left on its own. It suffices that we gave it a brief outlook. Now we move to the Shambhavopaya, Shaktopaya, and the lowest of them all is Anavupaya. And as you can see, let's maybe put just the first letter. So SH, up, Shakt, Shakti, Shakt, up, and Anu, Anupaya. Shambhavopaya has the operating power as will. The operating power of the highest of the three means is will. The perception, the mode of perception is immediate, instant, immediate. And it represents the aspect of I consciousness. Going back to the triangle, it stands for pure subjectivity and the principle of I consciousness. So in other words, when Shambhava Upaya is applied, and when Shambhava Upaya is at work, all cognitions, all perceptions without exception, are being first and foremost cognized as pure subjectivity of experience before any cognitive processes can kick in. You see? So in other words, in the presence of I consciousness before anything else, and cognition of the mode of perception is immediate, instantaneous. As we can see, it's very high in terms of its application. It will be further clear why that is when we look into this, what is known as Shaktopaya, which belong the sphere of empowered means with an operating Shakti as that of Jnana Shakti, which stands for cognition. It's the power of consciousness. Here, power of consciousness and the power of cognition is spoken interchangeably. And the operating and the mode of perception here is synthetic. synthesized. If in the higher Upaya of Shambhavopaya 1, it's spoken of as immediate or para, as we have spoken a few days ago, then the level of conscious means is both para, apara. So the mode of perception is synthesis of both. When we speak of Shambhavopaya, the principle of I, consciousness, and therefore mode of perception is immediate. The mode of perception here is synthesis. And because it is operating power here is different. The operating power here is that of knowledge. That what connects subject with object through the power of cognition. We will have to return to this again, and perhaps again to make it clear. How does subject and object relate? We know that from the conceptual framework of understanding of what we have spoken so far, which is exemplified in the drawing on the other side, right, our yesterday's drawing, that subject and object are one. There's different modes of perception. Subject, in fact, and object has a relationship that could be defined as subject recognizing itself in the object, and that's how experience takes place. So that synthesis is subject recognizes itself in the object. So the Upaya, the Shaktopaya, or empowered means, it's when the power of consciousness is utilized as the driving force in this particular means of grasping the ultimate reality or immersing into the essence of ultimate reality. Descending further down to the what constitutes here the place of a sphere of objective experience has a corresponding methodology which is tailored to individual means, which comprises of the entire gamut of all spiritual methodologies. In yogic terms, from yamas to niyamas, do's and don'ts, codes of conduct, establishing healthy, conducive framework which creates the foundational ground upon which one can build, to all the initiations, learning all methodological practices, reading, hearing, receiving instructions, reflections, and so forth. All this is here. All belongs to that level tailored to individual means. You see? And the operating power here is Kriya Shakti. The Kriya Shakti. That what we speak of in English language as action. The mode of perception here, as opposed to the higher ones, is all based on analysis, analytical. So we've got immediate, synthetic, analytical. So the mode of perception at the level of individual means is analytical. It's the power to discriminate, to scrutinize, analyze. So in other words, this is all this what goes into what makes this Upayas, Upaya successful is the capacity of how one's intellect is developed. And intellect here to be not understood in isolation from all other faculties. Everything goes here into the making of what makes this level to build, let's say, steady foundational ground where one can bounce off and reach to the level where other means and methodologies can be applied successfully. So you can see here now that there are in that, let's say, within these four means, from no means to the means which is as varied as what we could speak of in terms of that plane of objective experiences. Everything is valid here. So in other words, this is the bottom level, spoken of as apara, inferior, apara, parapara, and para. Inferior, of course, because it works at the level of duality constantly. And constantly works at the level of duality. There is the dua, you see? This is what the duality is based on. Dua, and there is, let's say, an attempt by hook or by crook to overcome that so as to get established at whatever level where the individual means begin to bear fruits, and until there is a possibility arises when one can part or depart from duality-based methodologies. But if one is not grounded at this level, then applying, let's say, higher means as that what is also known direct path is, as you can see, inconsistent with the inner dynamics of the process. Why? Because of the operating powers of respective Shaktis. So those who insist that direct path is open to all and everyone can benefit from it from get going, effectively speaking, giving the one who is still requires to work at the level of individual means an illusory somehow belief that they have now leapfrogged into that where they feel that they are in the possession of that required understanding. But the dualistic nature of thought has not overcome. So it simply becomes a concept. Just as at this level, all based on concepts and precepts, this now becomes another concept. It incorporates by the mind and all these mental modifications into yet another concept. So this is, let's say, I would say, more or less comprehensive assessment of the attempts at misapplying methodological approaches of high means in the situations when individual means still meant to bear some fruits. We're not even speaking about this because there are talks of nothing is required, and sacred songs of the Lord are being brought in. Ribhu Gita, Ashtavakra Gita. All these highest scriptures, very concise, are being thrown to common folk in attempts to enlighten everyone. And I just would like to give down-to-earth example here. Everyone who is more or less serious about tea drinking, and uses high-quality tea, and high-quality tea comes at a price. And also it requires certain tea utensils. Like if you have a very high-grade quality tea, you better go and get yourself a small teapot, something which also preferably made of a ware that is compatible, conducive, and gives the possibility for that experience to gain maximum, let's say, impact, so as not to waste that precious tea. So you'll have a clay, like beautiful teapots made out of these, materials. Most of them are one way or another porous. They're not completely porcelain and glazed. And because that in itself makes water softer, that this, however, delicate interaction between the water, the tea, and that out of which the teapot is made gives that beautiful, let's say, symbiosis, which then results in a greater, in maximizing the experience. But from time to time, everyone who is serious about it knows that the teapots get dirty. If you drink tea every single day in that teapot, you cannot just go and rub it with, use like with some kind of sponge or brush and use detergent, because the stuff is entered the porous surface of the clay. So you need to soak the teapot overnight. There's a non-invasive way to do that. Soda and lemon, something which will cause the reaction. And you leave it for several hours, maybe overnight. So then this slow interaction will dissolve this more stubborn, let's say, repository, that what got stained the teapot from inside and already begins to affect the purity of the tea. And the next morning, then you can give it a good rub, and all this will easily dislodge. See? So you discard that after all this, using brushes to clean the nose of the teapot and all the rest of it, all the crevices depending on the shape of the teapot. So, and of course, after you've done that, there will be this final rinsing, isn't it? Final rinsing. You're not going to just use detergent, all that. No, that final rinsing. So all these non-dual scriptures of the highest degree is the final rinsing. It's a final rinsing. So in other words, if there are lots of residues, and that's what this level represents, lots of vikalpas and samskaric residues, hoping that you can give Ribhu Gita, Ashtavakra Gita final rinse is a wishful thinking. The pot is not cleaned. On a mental level, yes, I just rinsed it. Wouldn't that be enough? No. I'm giving this down-to-earth example simply because it's very close to me. I drink tea, and I know that periodically teapots meant to be cleaned, and cleaned properly. So this is to further, I don't want to use the word to debunk, to bring clarity to when and how direct path can truly bear fruits. Then the either no means or the Shambhavu Paya is of highest use because it is the final rinse. One is no longer dwelling at the level where all this, exemplified by the field of action, the field of diversity, which is constantly gives us this impression of the separation of the subject and object, is all intact. Giving it a shot, yes. Giving it as many shots as one can to introduce someone to the possibilities of higher means is a must. But to turn this into one and only methodology is inconsistent, at least with the practice upon which the Tantra is built and known for, because it is known for variety of ways of how to tackle what needs to be tackled here. So this is what I wanted to address, so that we remember that when the operating power, Ananda, is in full charge, then the no means here are close at hand. This is why there is this saying that has been passed on from heart to heart in not just tantric traditions, but it is simply known, you know. The get to the bliss and the knowledge will follow. Get to the bliss and the knowledge will follow. See? Because bliss is the power of Shakti, which is the subtlest. When bliss is present, it's a piece of cake to go beyond the dichotomized nature of thought. And at some point it feels like a catch-22, because up until there is dichotomized mental processes at work, bliss is concealed by that very, very dichotomy of subject and object, which gives a plenty of momentum for the pendulum to swing. And mind revels in that swing, see? That's what gives mind constantly something to think about, analyze, scrutinize. So analyze and scrutinize as a methodology then, you see? That's, at that level, the value of spiritual knowledge is paramount. Simple examples are given. Mind is compared to monkey in this tradition, that tradition. In some traditions, it is compared to a dog. Train the dog. Like, who is the master in the house? When the dog becomes the master, it's horrible. Have you seen those dog owners? The dog takes the master for a walk. And then master does everything to catch up and just like out of breath and everything, you know. Rex, sit! And the dog is just like gone, screwing another dog or like barking on someone, chasing. And it's ridiculous, isn't it? The dog went to obey the master, you know? And the better the relationship there is, no words are needed, just like, the dog is already, like. So, mind is compared to a dog. Not to humiliate the mind, but it's compared to a dog because of reflexes, because of all these inborn tendencies. And the training here is comprised of basically give dog, right, something good to chew on. So it doesn't run around everywhere and find some kind of, you know. Give it a good juicy bone with all that jelly in it and all that stuff in it. So give your mind nourishment in the form of spiritual teaching. then even if it's still in that pendulum, as inevitably it will, because the dichotomy is still intact, at least it chews on something which grinds and nourishes at the very same time, that what, effectively speaking, creates the healthier, stable, and conducive foundations. Without these foundations, applying the highest means is, effectively speaking, robbing spiritually minded being of a possibility to build on sound foundations. Because when this is turned into a concept, it at a subtle level reinforces itself, because it simply belongs to that. It's projected into the sphere, and think like non-duality is like people mentally grasp that, you see? And that becomes a concept, which is then applied frivolously, unabashedly, as a cop-out from situations, from encounters, from what have you, because it's an enormous bypass have taken place. Enough of that. Emphasis is here. We work on this already. We have meditations, discourses, and so on. We constantly apply that at any given. And we give our best shot at this in all our immersions, in all our discourses. And you know that very well. But our bread and butter is in that what belongs to the cognitive sphere, what belongs to the power of cognition, Shaktopaya, the empowered means. And in order to work at this level, awakening of the life force is required. As we have heard in the passages from the Chamatkara, the hidden path, because then the most conducive situation is created where what is represented at the level of objective experiences, at the level of multiplicity and diversity, which now borrowing insights from previous discourses, is effectively speaking in itself a result of the descent of pure awareness into the sphere of objectivity. So in other words, from the highest state, it descends into the state of the unconscious, to such degree that it's not even conscious of its own luminosity. See? The paradox here. So that awakening of the life force, therefore, in all hermeneutic traditions have been seen as a must to overcome that. And many of you know that what is experienced at any movement, any ground movement of what Kundalini stands for, creates major shifts in your awareness, major shifts in understanding.